Am I supposed to introduce?
Well, I'd love to know how you'd introduce me.
I've given that no thought. Maybe next time.
Good. Next time, okay. Hi, everyone. This Sunday would be carols in the park, or this year was going to be something new, possibly carols in the car park, or something else that we didn't get to devise because of the year that 2020 has been. So this teaching series was originally devised to finish last week. But as it evolved, it became clear that having a week in which we tried to address neurodiversity and mental health in 30 minutes was perhaps a little bit too challenging even for us. So we've spilled over into this Sunday, and we're going to look specifically at mental health. So it's I just want to let you know that that's what we're going to be talking about from the start. I know it's challenging. It's something that many of us experience. Some of us in episodes. For others, it's a chronic thing, which just means chronos. It goes on for a long time. So let's pray to begin with, and let's put Jesus at the center of what we do. Jesus, we love you, heart, soul, mind, and strength. And there are many reasons that we love you. Today, I want to thank you that you know us. That nothing about us is hidden from you, because you live in us, in every part of us, body, soul, mind, and strength. We open ourselves to you, to whatever work you want to do with us, to challenge us, to heal us, to draw us closer to you, to call us to follow you. We listen. We are open. Amen. You may or may not have noticed that this season we have been trying to follow the Gospel of Mark. And nearly all of our readings have been from the Gospel of Mark. And there was a reading for today that I started preparing, but then I decided to dump it. And the reason why is that all of the best stuff that I could say about the stuff in Mark has already been said by Sally Nelson in her week on disability. That it is sometimes I listen to talks that I've missed, or I'll go back to talks to make sure that what I'm doing is in the flow of what's come before. But it's rare that I've gone back just to listen to a talk again, because there was so much in it that I needed to hear it again. And so in terms of one of the challenges of dealing with mental health, the fact that although Jesus's parents use a kind of mental health related insult in that they say that he's out of his mind. So we have to recognize that people in Jesus' day did understand the idea of mental illness. In general, there's a huge blurring of the boundaries between mental illness and demon possession. And it's really difficult to get to the bottom of that. And it's one of the things that clouds our conversation about mental health. But if you go back and listen to Sally's talk and apply it to mental illness, it is just as relevant. And so I'm not going to address that in particular. Instead, I want to take a more person-focused and optimistic and practical direction. And to start with, I'm going to ask Rachel, who I find it a really spiritual thing watching you doing your decorating, Rachel. Actually, I don't know why. It's beautiful. So Rachel is going to read a scripture from John's Gospel. I said to Rachel that Mark's Gospel is a bit like the Indiana Jones Gospel. It's all sorts of wham bam pow, action filled, whereas John is a bit more. I imagine John's Gospel being written in San Francisco in the 1960s. It's all peace and love. Rachel, if you could read our Gospel reading for us today.
Thanks, door frame today, standing door frame. As the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friend. You are my friends if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I have learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command: love each other.
Those are words that we've heard a lot, and often the focus when we listen to that passage is on love. That at the heart of what we are about is love, not a kind of gushy feeling, but that here we have Jesus's definition of love, a definition that he has to put into personal practice to lay down his life for his friends. And then he says something about friendship. You know, we know elsewhere that Jesus redefines neighborship, but here he says, you're not my servants, you're not just people that work for me, I call you my friends. It's quite a revolutionary thing. And I was reading about the Leeds United coach, Marcelo Bielsa, who doesn't have any friendships with any of his teams. As a total amateur, I would make a guess that he is on the autistic spectrum. He's brilliant technically, but he doesn't do relationships with his playing staff, even though he's identified as a very kind and caring person. Jesus doesn't go for that approach. He's like, you're not just playing for me, you're my friends. And I want to know how we as a community can live out that notion of friendship with Jesus and friendship with each other. So we're going to listen to a friend now. A couple of weeks ago, I put out a call and said, is there anyone in our community that would be willing to talk about their experience of mental illness? And wonderfully, Ali has been brave enough to put herself forward. So Ali, if you can just unmute yourself and say hi, and that then means that hopefully people will get to see you.
Hi.
Brilliant, Ali. It's wonderful. You've been part of Chapel A for a long time, and lots of people here know you. but maybe there are things that they don't know. Can you tell a little bit about your experience of mental illness and how it affects your life?
Yeah, I think I've had episodes of poor mental health probably the vast majority of my life. I've had episodes where it's been particularly bad. And the last one was 10 years ago, and recently I've gone through another quite bad episode, which meant that I was off work for 7 months. I literally went off work the week before lockdown started. So this year has been particularly, in terms of where my illness affects me, has been obviously very difficult. You know, that's kind of in a very, in a nutshell, kind of my illness. And so basically I have anxiety and depression. One kind of goes hand in hand. And the first, I think reflecting back on my teenage years, I think I saw elements of depression then, but back in the day, that kind of thing wasn't kind of recognised. It was probably just seen as somebody who was a teenager going through teenage stuff. And then, up until recently, I would say my experience of having a mental illness is I've felt at times less than. I felt that I had to be very mindful of other people's reactions, not wanting to burden them with how I was feeling. I didn't want people to, this is all in my head, of course. I'm not saying that people would react that way, but I didn't want people to pity me or put me in a box. I absolutely hate that, being put in a box and saying this is how you are, this is who you are. I'm categorically do not want my mental health to define me as a person. It's part of who I am. I don't deny it, but it doesn't define who I am. So yeah, so does that answer the question? I hope so.
Yeah, thank you. That's really, I think it is brave. I mentioned at the start that sometimes being a Christian is not good for someone who experiences mental illness, because it's seen as a kind of personality flaw or even a kind of lack of faith. But how has being a Christian affected the way that you've experienced your illness?
I think I've had the complete opposite experience of that. Just 1 second, sorry.
Parcel delivery time. Well, there you go. I'm not
Sorry
sure that's
about
happened in church before.
Sorry, I'm sorry about that. Sorry, can you just repeat?
That's all right. We can edit this bit out. Let's do this bit again. So how have you experienced mental illness as a Christian?
Actually, spiritually, in an amazing way, really. I think, not to be too cheesy about it, but I did definitely feel I was in a fight between darkness and light, and that God was, at times, he didn't feel like he was there, and then other times his presence was incredible. I think it increased my faith rather than decreased my faith. If we're talking about my relationship between me and God in that spiritual relationship, I think also from a practical point of view, I mean, people have just been absolutely amazing. I think part of it is being able to feel confident that you could actually say how you're actually feeling. And there's been people who, and it's definitely, although it's very isolating to have a mental health problem, to get well, it is definitely not a one person thing. It's a team, a team of people, both professional and personal, that help you to get from where you are to where you want to be. It's a very scary journey, particularly when you're very, very anxious anyway. And at times, you know, I wanted to, I didn't know if I was going to get better. You know, to be really open and honest about it, I was having suicidal thoughts that I was trying to deal with at the beginning. And that was really tough. But the people around me, God's love was very evident through people's love and compassion, as well as through my relationship with him. So yeah, it was a very tough, and this and also my family this time have been and are incredibly supportive. Now, whether that's just COVID-19 making us a bit more sort of thoughtful about our relationships, but my own father went through his an episode following my mum's death. He went through something similar, and he'd never experienced anything like that in his life. And I think that has made a massive impact in my family, that they kind of see it much, much differently now. So that for me, so I've got this incredible support, which I've never had, the whole package really, which I'd never had before. But yeah, but certainly from a spiritual point of view, this has been amazing. Words cannot express my gratitude to the people that have been there for me.
Thank you. Well, let's not try to express those words, but
I think they know.
Yeah, and I think that I'm going to stop there because I've got another interview coming up in a moment.
That's
so
fine.
Ali, that is wonderful, and thank you for sharing.
It's a pleasure.
And thank you for those, some of whom are here today, who have been the body of Jesus to Ali. And so, yeah, thank you, Chapel A, for being God's church. Brilliant, thank you. I'm just going to share very, very quickly. Sometimes ministers have to cheat when they're talking about something that they don't know about. I've had one episode of poor mental health, funnily enough, leading up to my episode of poor physical health 2.5 years ago. And so there's probably a link there. But to prepare for today, I've read, I've picked up the wrong book. There's a book not called Ethnicity, somewhere in this room, called Mental Health. And I'm just going to share some quotes from it very, very quickly before I share another video. So don't worry about that. I can hear my wife rushing in to try and find it, but don't worry, it's all right. I don't need to show anybody.
Sorry, I tidied it away.
She tidied it away. There you go. And so I read that book, and I'm just going to read some quotes. This was just going to be to remind you of our theme about the fact that inclusion is part of the gospel in Chapel Allerton. But let's rush. I'm going to read you these quotes from this book. I don't necessarily. I'm still thinking about them. There's particularly the middle one. You can tell me what you think of that one later. But perhaps those who've experienced chronic mental illness will be able to tell me how that one feels. But I'm just going to read this out. The love of Jesus has to be seen to be believed. The beginning point for the church's ministry alongside people with mental illness is the recognition of the power of graceful love. In a special way, people with mental illnesses need to hear, see, and feel the message of the love, acceptance, and graceful forgiveness of Jesus. The church's special task of walking with people with mental illness is not focused on curing. God may choose to cure, but that is not the church's primary responsibility. The key task of the church is to enable healing. Curing relates to the eradication of an illness or disease, but healing is something different, something deeper, more soulful. Healing has to do with wholeness, inner beauty, unity, and peace. In the Bible, such wholeness is described as shalom. Shalom is not the absence of illness, rather it is the presence of God. When the world backs away and refuses to name people properly, the church must join in with Jesus' words, I call you friends. When people are excluded from communities by the fear of difference, pushed out into the darkness of loneliness, exclusion, and isolation, their identities hidden behind names that terrify the world and themselves, the church is called to give people back their names, to whisper or shout, I call you friends. I know that you are loved, and I want you, not others, to tell me your name. It is in small things such as this that the face of Jesus is revealed to the world. And that's really a reference to the idea that people with mental illness don't want to be boxed in. They don't want to be defined by a diagnosis. So just being with someone, it can't be our job to cure. If someone has cancer or a broken leg, we pray for them, but we also let professionals do their job. And when someone experiences illness, what they want most is people around them, the body of Jesus, to show up and be there with them. When I thought about how to talk about this subject, I had someone in mind. You may or may not have heard of a guy called Patrick Regan. He set up a charity in South London called XLP, and then suddenly he disappeared, stepped down, and then reappeared running a new organization, Kintsugi Hope. So I'm going to share an interview with him I did earlier this week, and I hope that you will understand why I have done that. So let's see if I can get all of this running. And no, I don't know why it doesn't fill the whole screen. If someone can help me with that later, that would be great. So, Patrick, it is wonderful to see you. Thank you for becoming part of Chapel A for a few minutes. I became aware of you when I was working for Oasis down the road in Waterloo, and I knew that something exciting was happening up the road. You were involved in a project called XLP, which continues to this day, working with young people, particularly people who were excluded in all sorts of ways. And then suddenly you sort of disappeared off the radar, and then a whole load of stuff happened, and now you're part of a new organization called Kintsugi Hope. Can you tell us a bit about how that happened, and you know what caused the change of direction for you?
Yeah, sure. No problem. So I guess I went through one of those stages in my life, Simon. I always called the Tetris moment. Do you remember the game Tetris? Are you a similar age?
Oh yeah, yes.
So for those of you who don't know, Tetris was this game, right, where the computer game, all these blocks, they fell out of the sky, and you had to rotate them and get them in a straight line. And once they were in a straight line, then more blocks came, and it just got faster and faster and faster. And then eventually it was game over. And I sort of felt like that was my life. Like things just went wrong one after another. Just life. You know, Dad got cancer. My children got very, very ill. It was very scary. I got diagnosed with a degenerative knee condition that means I need to get both my legs broken in 3 places, major surgery, major operation. We lost the baby, miscarriage. And it was just like, I started to unravel. And I just couldn't do it anymore. And I started to get really, really, really anxious. On 2 ones. One is obviously I had a massive, 2 big operations I had to go through. But I was just, in some ways, that almost masked, I think, what was there all my life, was this real struggle with anxiety and how to handle anxiety. And to be honest, Simon, I felt a little bit ashamed. And I didn't really tell many people in church, because church was always very much, you got to have faith, and you know, just got to pray harder. And when I did mention it, some people just said to me, I remember that someone said to me, well, you know, Patrick, you just need to trust God a bit more. as if I've never tried that. You know what I mean? As if that had never occurred to me. And then you end up feeling guilty and you feel ashamed, and you feel there's something wrong with me, or God obviously doesn't like me as much as he likes the other guys in church who don't seem to be struggling with this. And so during this period, I wrote a book called When Faith Gets Shaken, and it was really honest. And I had never received so many emails and text messages and messages through social media going, oh my goodness, me too. But I've never heard a Christian talk about it before. And so during that time of real brokenness, I came across the image of kintsugi, which is this beautiful image of crockery, I guess. When it gets broken, we tend to mend it with super glue, which hides the cracks. And what they do in Japan is they put gold powder in it. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. So beauty comes out of brokenness. So it's more unique. It's more beautiful for being broken. And that just sort of kept me going really during that time. And I just realized, oh my goodness, there is such a need in the church and beyond to have a much more safe and supportive space where we can talk about when life unravels and when we feel overwhelmed and, you know, stuff like that really.
Fantastic. You mentioned a bit about how church wasn't actually the safest place to talk about this stuff, and that's a real challenge. Today we're talking in the Gospel of Mark about some of the issues around people who might now be diagnosed with a mental illness. They might, in those days, people might automatically have gone to a kind of spiritual definition of demon possession or something like that. And as you say, it's often seen as being a lack of faith, whereas no one tells you you've got a lack of faith if you break your leg. But with mental illness, it seems to be seen as a kind of deficiency. You were leading a fast-growing organization. You were seen as, dare I say it, successful. How did you cope with experiencing this really severe anxiety while at the same time living in this world that wanted you to be a man of faith and not to fail, and you had a kind of image to promote? How did you kind of work that through in terms of your relationship with God?
I mean, you're right. It was a challenge. I remember actually there was one day we had the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge came to XLP. I hope you caught those names as they dropped. And like those photos went around the world. You know, literally around the world. It was on the 6 o'clock news. It just went absolutely crazy. And obviously when you get that sort of coverage, you get lots of texts coming in going, oh, it's so good, you're doing so well, and I remember the Facebook post looking amazing, but the behind the scenes being anything but. And I think so often we live in a culture where we portray the Facebook post, and actually in our preaching, I think sometimes our challenge is, you know, I've been to a lot of conferences and festivals over the years, is particularly from the main stage, is all the stories are like healing stories, success stories. And actually there weren't many stories like, I've had anxiety for 20 years and I've learned to manage it, you know, and there was nothing like that. And so I really felt compelled. I've always been pretty honest. I've never tried to have an image that I protect or all that sort of stuff. I've never had done that, but I felt like a real sense of, this isn't right. We've created a culture. If you define culture as the way we do things around here, you know, every church has a culture, every organization, every business has a culture. It's like, how we created a culture where people can't be honest for fear of being judged. I think that's the crux of it, is people were scared of being judged. And then, you know, I read the Psalms, and 40% of the Psalms are laments. They're David crying out to God, I just don't get it, you know. But we always want a happy ending, and our worship songs are full of victorious Christian living, you know, and yet there's not many the songs that are laments. And so, you know, I feel like there needs to be a real culture shift within the church, I think it started to happen in some churches, but I think I'm sort of praying in some ways that one of the things that's come out of this horrible experience of COVID would be that maybe that culture starts to shift a little bit and we can just be a little bit more honest with each other and a little bit more vulnerable and open. I was really inspired by a research professor called Brené Brown from the States, who did this whole thing around courage and vulnerability are the same thing. The Latin word for courage is cur. It means to speak your mind with your heart, to show up and let your true self be seen. And I think that's where real belonging happens, when you could go, this is what I'm really like. And people go, I love you anyway. That's okay. You know, it's okay not to be okay. I think then that there becomes a sense of belonging in that, which is beautiful, really.
So you're a Christian, you're part of a church. You mentioned that the way that perhaps individual Christians responded was not ideal, and you know, we're all human. We don't
Absolutely, yeah.
We don't live up to the ideal. But Capella is we're good people. We want to try to serve those within our church community who experience these kind of ongoing things, or even have like a sudden time of massive stress, and we want to know how to welcome other people so that they feel safe among us. What would you say would have made your experience more supportive and healing, or you know, moving forward? I mean, I'm aware that this is what you're helping churches do all the time, but just briefly, what could we as a church do to become more of a safe place for people who experience mental illness?
Yeah, I mean, I always talk about Jesus and the Emmaus Road. You know, it's one of my favorite stories, and because I love the fact that the day after Jesus' resurrection, there's no marketing campaign, there's no mass meeting, there's, you know, which you'd expect all the sort of communication strategy people going, this is rubbish. You're walking with two people that no one's ever heard of, who are heartbroken, disillusioned and frustrated. And I'm like, that is amazing. He just walked with two people. And the thing I love about the Emmaus Road story is at no point does Jesus jump in and go, guys, you need to chill out a little bit. I'm Jesus, everything's good. He let them tell their story and their pain, their anxiety. And then he started telling a bigger story, didn't he? The story of God and how that sort of makes sense of it. And then they stopped for a meal. In fact, Jesus was going to go on. He's going to leave them hanging, which I find quite interesting. But they persuade him to stop for a meal. And it's over that, you know, when he breaks the bread, brokenness reveals who Jesus is. And I feel like that we have to somehow stop the temptation, because you're right, people are good people, but we need to stop the temptation of being the rescuer, being the one that tries to fix everything. Because people want to be loved. You belong before you believe, and that is really important for people to feel like they're not judged for struggling. Struggling doesn't mean you're a failure, it means you're a human being at the end of the day. And I feel like the church has a role and medical professionals have a role. You know, my friend put like this, we run these wellbeing groups, and we were a bit nervous about doing it because I was like, do we have to be like mental health professionals to run these groups? You know, I don't want to do anything wrong. And he was like, you know, if you get cancer, you go to the hospital and you expect the hospital to give chemo, radiotherapy, all the treatment that you need. Talk to anyone that's been through a cancer journey, they'll say what also got them through was and doctors, you know, we've got lots of GPs that work with us. They're going, 5 minutes with me is not going to solve this issue for this person. Even an hour of counselling, as fantastic as that might be, is going to be community. And so I think the church has an amazing role to play. And, you know, the charity run, we just try and train churches up to run a 12-week wellbeing group. It's a bit like Weight Watchers for Wellbeing. It's not complicated. written in learning styles. Grab some people, grab some neighbours, home group, go on a journey together, exploring emotional and mental health. And it's just these really beautiful things that come out of it.
That's fantastic. The image of the crockery that has gold put in it is becoming sort of part of our mental furniture, I think, in this culture. And so initially, I guess a lot of people wonder what the name means, but I think slowly but surely as I say, it's becoming part of our language. And one thing that you were saying earlier was actually that this is something that is perhaps easier to share than a more didactic evangelistic program, and easier to participate in for someone that's not part of a church. Do you have any stories about that, of how it's working in terms of people being able to share good news in a very practical way?
Yeah, I mean, totally. So over the 12 weeks, we look at all sorts of subjects you'd expect. On the second week, we looked at anxiety. And so some people were talking just how the way they handle anxiety is prayer. So, it's an obvious thing to say. We got to the week on forgiveness, and this non-Christian, Catherine, she's brilliant. She was like, yeah, forgiveness, I get it. What I don't get is, how do you forgive someone who isn't sorry? Which is a brilliant question to ask. Mm-hmm. And then she looked at me and she went, you Christians, you have to forgive everyone, don't you? Can you explain that to the rest of us, please? And I sort of looked at my wife at this point, who was actually the leader of the group, and went, yeah, to be honest, I don't really understand that either. Can you? I got that look, Simon, that only a wife can give a husband. I'm going to kill you afterwards. But we had this incredible conversation about forgiveness, redemption, and what does forgiveness actually mean. And then it was really funny. So my neighbour came to the group, and we got to week 12. It's loosely based on Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step program. And she was like, what's happening next week? And I was a bit embarrassed. I was like, we're going back to Bible study next week. And she goes, well, what's that then? I go, well, we're looking at this guy called Jonah. And she's like, who's he? I don't know if you ever tried describing Jonah to a non-Christian. It's not the most interesting. Like, it just sounds weird as it starts coming out of your mouth, And she was like, don't worry, I'm coming. I love this group. I've never felt, and we've heard stories of people coming to faith, people coming back to faith because they've gone to a church and they'd had a really bad experience because of their mental health journey and felt condemned and judged. And I think the key thing for me is there is no them and us. There's just us. We're all on a journey with our emotional, mental, and spiritual health, and we're just sharing that journey together. And I think that's what Jesus did with the disciples, to be honest. I think it wasn't until after his resurrection they really understood who he was. They're having all sorts of arguments beforehand and getting it wrong most of the time. And it was like Jesus must have been so frustrated at times. But actually he let them on that journey, and they went on to change and totally change the world. So,
Brilliant. Patrick, thank you ever so much for your time and for your vulnerability and for the work that you do. God bless you. And who knows, maybe we'll be in touch again soon. And
that'd be nice.
You've mentioned that you've got a video specifically about Christmas. Can you just mention that, and then we'll share the link on the day?
Sure. Yeah, so I've just done this short talk really called Mentally Healthy Christmas, if such thing is possible. Our thought life around how we respond to some of the pressure points that are going to be going on around us. So you can check that out if you want.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Bless you. And hopefully see you again soon. Bye-bye. Wonderful. I hope that has been helpful to you. And I am just going to pass over to Mark. We've got just another 3 or 4 minutes